Here we are for the second, which will be just as remarkable. We will start with a critical and vital topic: sustainability and sustainable business. The world is going through a phase with major changes, and innovation is at the heart of sustainable tomorrows. Moreover, change sometimes brings the opportunity to transform our ways of doing and being. Every day, more and more brands recognize what is good for people, the planet, and they will also serve for good in terms of benefits and value. It is promising to see the number of carbon neutral companies increasing day by day, but sustainability and the concept of sustainable business, unlike generally assumed, is not only about environmental concerns, but also has a lot to do with education, gender equality, economic growth, and much more. To go further on this topic, I am excited to invite you to be a part of our next panel, which will be moderated by someone who is also personally very interested and concerned about sustainability. Hakan Bulgurlu, CEO of Arçelik, and his guests are Mark Zaleski from BCG Digital Ventures, Niklas Kaskeala from Compensate, and Salla Ahonen from Nestle Corporation.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Hakan Bulgurlu. I'm CEO of Arçelik. Many of you, of course, know exactly who I am. I'm very, very pleased to be moderating the panel today. We have some very interesting guests who are at the forefront of what we're trying to do in terms of sustainability. Their experience globally in different industries is something that's very relevant for us. And today's topic, we are talking about open innovation. I think it is very fitting because the two go hand in hand. We do have a little Finnish-heavy panel today. It's a small country that punches more than its weight, and that is because they, of course, have been focusing on innovation for so long. And that's why you have so many Finnish global businesses, and that's also why they're at the forefront of this transformation in terms of sustainability. Now, because I speak often, and I wrote a lot about it in my book that was just recently published, if we are going to make a dent and really change our future for the better, for our children's sake, we need to really change how we produce, how we sell, how we consume products and services. And as Arçelik, a product manufacturer, our impact is sizable. We have scale, and our transformation actually moves the needle. I'm not going to talk too much about that, but you're all aware of our targets, very aggressive targets of cutting our emissions, all emissions, scope 3 included, by 2030 and becoming net zero by 2050. Now, that is easier in some sectors, harder in others, oil and gas obviously being a virtually impossible one. So I'm really looking forward to hear about that. We need technology, which we'll hear from Mark. There's something for everyone on this panel. But one common denominator here is that if we are to get to these ambitious targets that we're all setting, it is only going to happen with innovation and new technologies, because at the moment, the technology needed to get to where we want to be doesn't exist. And the only way forward is open innovation. Now, I just want to give a simple example. We cannot simply say one nation is going to be ahead of the other, like Finland, because of years of investment in this area, may be ahead, but actually Finland being ahead won't make a difference. We need to act as one global force, both in business and governments and consumers, to be able to get to goals which will actually make a difference to our quality of life and literally the sustainability of the human race. That's how far I go. Most people don't like hearing that, but it's an existential threat what we're facing, and we all need to do what we need to do. Now, I just want to give a simple example to open innovation, because it's very recent. This morning I received an email that Vestel, our key competitor, is coming out with essentially their own version of a fiber catcher. And my comment, my colleague's reaction was, look, they've copied us once again. And I said, no, they haven't actually, because what we did is we came up with a technology, we patented it, and this technology essentially filters all the plastic fibers that come off a wash in a washing machine and saves about 90% or more of it from going into the oceans. But when we came up with this technology, we announced to the whole industry that we're open sourcing our technology and we will let them use our IP. And our intention is for every manufacturer to use this so that we can make a dent and actually clean up the mess we're creating in terms of the oceans. And for me, seeing our main competitor in Turkey, at least, come out with a model is a sense of pride, not something to be derided. But this is a great example of open innovation because that filter came from a basic idea, collaborating with many different sectors, our suppliers, a very quick study with consumers and retailers, and today it's one of the products I'm most proud of. Now, I've already passed my time, and that's terrible for a moderator to do. So we're with Mark, Niklas, and Salla. They are leading figures. You are leading figures in your industries, especially with a sustainability focus. Can we start with corporate collaboration and open innovation? Like, what kind of a role, briefly, do you think that open innovation will play when it comes to sustainability? Maybe we can start, Salla, we can start with you, then Mark, then Niklas.
Sure, thank you. I'm actually an engineer, so I make everything into a formula. So for me, I often say that for Neste, sustainability equals innovation plus partnerships. So I actually really think that we don't move forward with our sustainability agenda without innovation. And I also make the point that for me, an innovation is only an innovation if it's also sustainable. So this is really something that is a driving force behind everything that we do. It surprises people quite often to hear that for a company like Neste, we have about 25% of the staff working on R&D and innovation. So this is really the foundation of the business as well. And then we also really look out for who to collaborate with. This is why my formula has the innovation and then plus partnerships. So who are the right people, the right organizations to collaborate with? And that depends really quite a lot on where you are in your journey. Because sometimes it's about working together with research institutes, with universities. Sometimes it's about finding the right startup who may have something that you don't have. And sometimes it's about finding, like you said, a competitor who can help you scale up your good solution.
Great, thank you. Yes, I'm particularly interested in how a company in your industry can actually really take sustainability as I mean, you kind of have to, but put it in the center of everything you do, as you said. And then actually, how do you gain traction? Because your targets are very aggressive, becoming carbon neutral. We'll talk about that later. Mark?
Yeah, thanks for inviting me, Hakan. Yeah, there are two facets to open innovation, and the one actually that Pinar mentioned earlier in the early in the, I was going to say the program, but you know what I mean, in this on today. I think the most common is the outside-in aspect, where external ideas and technologies are brought into the corporate's own innovation process. You always look for ideas and technologies that fit with your business model, but you could say logically those that don't fit can go to the outside. But what I really love is, for instance, what you're doing and what you mentioned earlier, that washing machine example, is also then giving it out to others, so that others can also benefit for the benefit of all of us. Because I think progress at scale will require corporates to drive climate innovation from the inside out and share their IP. 2050 net zero, it will be the largest investment in human history. We can't fail because we know that half the world's population could be exposed to, at least one climate hazard like drought or flooding and so on. So we know it is existential, as you said. But the technology, to get there, has been developed, but there's still a lot to do, right? And I think that corporates aren't going to be able to do everything by themselves. Yes, each corporate must focus on their assets, right? Their unique superpowers, if you like, that they've cultivated over the years, like customers and capital and processes, operations, and so on. And those will be the key, I think, to accelerate the unicorns of tomorrow, right? To the level of scale that we truly need to move the needle on climate change in the short amount of time that we've got. And I think in the next couple of years, we can expect to see the smartest corporates productize their assets at scale, launching platform plays, because they are, critical to the ecosystem that allows startups, if you like, to build off them and pivot off them, to help change the world.
Great. I fully agree with you. I mean, if we're going to change the world, this is how it's going to be done. Niklas?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, fully agree with the existential threat that we have. I mean, climate crisis is the biggest challenge humanity has ever faced, and we won't solve it if we stick to our silos and don't work together. I'm going to give you an example from the market where I work with. So Compensate is an impact startup that works in the what's called the voluntary carbon market. So where corporations or organizations, even individuals, can pay for carbon capture or avoided emissions in order to offset their emissions, unavoidable emissions. This can be done through technology or by using nature-based solutions in many ways. And we already have too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We surpassed safe levels of CO2 concentration in the late 80s. And since then, every single day, every one of us adds more CO2 into the atmosphere. So we need a system, we need a functioning market to remove excess CO2 from the atmosphere. But this is a very, very young market. It's a very immature market, and it's full of growing pains still. And Compensate, we developed a pretty innovative solution to tackle many of the challenges that the market has. But we decided right from the get-go that we won't just focus on our own innovations, but we'll publicize whatever we find and also make it available for others. So we work together with leading climate scientists, leading forest scientists, for example, to create criteria to evaluate carbon projects around the world. We've seen that most of them fail when we evaluate them. But what we've done is we've publicized, we've made it available for everyone, this criteria that we use, so everyone else can use it as well. We work a lot with advocacy towards reforming the market, getting more regulation, better regulation. We're working with NGOs, with investigative journalists, so forth. So I guess what I'm trying to say is basically that we're trying to achieve an impact that goes much further than our own service or our own, approach or our own products, trying to influence an entire market. And I think that's the sharing part of it that needs to be there. If you have something that's innovative, just don't keep it to yourselves. And it's similar to the washing machine example that you shared earlier. So very similar thinking there.
I will come back to some very specific questions with you because we're on the cusp of some very difficult decisions, and I think you will have very direct insight into that, and it concerns innovation as well. Let me get to some of my more challenging questions. These are not scripted, okay? So I'm going off script. You probably, Salla, know what to expect from me, but I'll be gentle. I mean, essentially, you come from an industry which is responsible for a large portion, not all of it, of course, of where we are today. I find it very brave that you're also trying to be at the leading edge of the transformation that will actually clean up your business and maybe even get to net positive if that's possible one way or the other. I'm specifically curious about, I say Arçelik is a dirty industry because we are using virgin materials and our products continue consuming electricity in their lifetime, right? So our scope 3 emissions are gigantic. I'll give you an example. If we cut it by 50%, that's 11.5 million tons. That's roughly the equivalent of Hungary's annual emissions as a country. So I know that companies with scale really are going to have to lead here. And I'm very curious to hear genuinely what action you're taking to reach those very ambitious targets you have. 2035, carbon neutral in production. In the oil and gas business, it's harder than ours. And then, of course, carbon net zero, which is even more ambitious target. So How much money have you set aside for this? And what is the role of innovation? And do you personally believe that you will get there?
I'll start with the last one. Yes, I couldn't do my job if I wouldn't believe in what I do. People quite often ask me, what is your budget? And that's the wrong question to ask, because it's not about us having a sustainability project that is supposed to solve the problem. It's about changing the company. It's about changing the way we operate. It's about changing our investment criteria. So really, when we started working on this carbon neutral production, and yes, we started with the production with our own activities. So looking at how can we bring that to zero, and how can we do it in a realistic manner. So we actually had a few workshops where we had people from all over the organization, production lines, business units, everywhere. And I said, hey, how can we get there? These are the biggest sources of emissions in our activities. So what can we do? And then I had a really wonderful moment when somebody from the production line asked me, are we allowed to dream? And I said, yes, this is where you dream. And then we see how we can make the dreams reality. And then there are some of these ideas are quite simple. How can we do things in a more energy efficient way? And how can we then move towards using only renewable electricity? What can we do about, and then some of them are more still needing more research, carbon capture and utilization, and what can we do about green hydrogen? So we started to see, why haven't we implemented these yet? So it was about us not having the right investment criteria. So now I've changed the investment criteria. So we went to our investment committee and we said that, look, every investment from here on, it needs to show our greenhouse gas impact. And now they do. But also we introduced an internal price on carbon so that we can show that it makes sense to do this, because we actually really believe that polluting will cost more in the future. And that's not all. What Niklas was also saying, you want to go beyond. It's also something, what is the role you take in the society? So we blew everybody's mind when we started saying that we think that carbon should cost more. Polluting should cost more. So we're actually also asking policymakers to make those choices so that it encourages others to, do the same that we're doing. It's also about finding how can we scale up green electricity. Everybody says that, we will go electric and then all the pollution will go away. But it's also making the right choices in building the infrastructure so that it's actually available for all the industrial processes, etc. We've actually started, making power purchase agreements so that there will be new green electricity available for us, but also others need to look into, realistically, is this going to happen? We now have 100 different initiatives, and I really mean it, that we have put on a roadmap. We have about 80 different people in charge of them. So it's not, Salla and the sustainability team will do something, but it's about those who run that part of the business. They are in charge of these specific initiatives. We report to our executive committee bi-monthly. We report to our board. This is one of our strategic priorities. This is included in our leadership bonuses. So basically, if they intend to get their bonuses, it's not just about selling more, it's also about meeting our climate targets. So this is what I mean. It's not about having a budget. It's about changing how you operate the company.
Yeah, you pretty much tick off every box there is when you need to make sustainability a priority in the way you run your business. I do believe that this is has to be a leadership owned way of thinking. And what we have done is we have a separate balance sheet for carbon and a separate balance sheet for profit and money. And actually, we weigh the balance of both everything we do. In your case, though, of course, it's very, very difficult. So I'd like to understand maybe in the next couple of questions, like, are you buying carbon credits or are you creating carbon credits to offset what you are doing? Or are you really trying to clean up your industrial processes? Because I think that's also a very important point.
We're trying to do everything that is possible, but we know that not everything can be taken away, which is why we're talking to credible offset providers, Niklas included, actually, because we want to make sure that then, because like Niklas was also saying, it's a developing market. There are also offset providers that I don't find credible. So we've actually also made it our business to make sure that when we do buy offsets, we know that it's actually going to work. It's actually going to be a long-term solution. And we've actually given ourselves the target that it would also target biodiversity. So we really want to look at a larger sustainability action.
Great. I will put Niklas in the hot seat around that later on. But maybe with you, I believe in a process like yours, open innovation is going to play a key role in actually changing the way you produce things and changing the way how you consume fossil fuels in your processes, because that's where technology will be needed. And maybe this will bring me to Mark. I mean, basically, I'm putting my finger on something which is the same for everyone. In our industry, it's easier, right? It's relatively simple. You just make your buildings much more energy efficient. You basically create circular loops for your waste materials, water. You produce your own energy. This year, we're I think it's about 50 megawatts. I mean, we're on our rooftops. We're becoming a power company ourselves. And we're not outsourcing that either. So this is committing capital to producing our own power so that we reduce our emissions. Because don't get me wrong, I'm a supporter of offsets also, credible ones. But I think the point of industrial manufacturers has to be reducing what they actually cause. And there's many, many ways of doing that. And I think innovation and technology will have a key part there. So you've been in and out of many technology companies. I mean, you see more businesses inside out. Do you see revolutionary technologies coming in this area of decarbonization? Or do you see smaller startups, tech companies investing in this open innovation approach, trying to attack the problem from this angle? Because everybody's looking at offsets now and how they can, that's an easy solution. How much focus is on the difficult solution?
Yeah, I mean, I think, excuse me, I think offsets are a little bit of, I mean, it's hedging. I mean, you're still somewhere, the problem's still there. It's a Band-Aid solution. So we have to solve the root causes, if you like. And I think, and it was mentioned earlier as well, I think both Salla and Niklas mentioned it, about partnerships, between startups, corporates, and academia. I think it is really, is the way to maximize the impact of climate tech. Because I know that there is a lot of innovation coming from academia and startups, but then working together with the corporates that have the scale and the resources to get them the impact faster, I think is critical. So I think that's the largest role that corporates can play, rather than just taking carbon credits, that they're actually trying to take innovative solutions to solve the root causes. So I think really it's we know that corporations occasionally are extremely creative. Sometimes they're not. Obviously, I'm excited with what you were talking about earlier, Hakan. But I think working together to accelerate innovation is the right way to go. And we've said, at BCGDV, we've been around nearly 8 years. We've said that corporates in particular will be and need to be the key drivers of innovation. And that's crucial for climate innovation too. So it might be that you don't actually have all the answers. You have all the tools and all the resources and the assets, if you like, to really take what's out there from academia, from startups who perhaps are looking at, to solve something very, very particular. But then you are then the super additive to then drive that innovation forward to really solve the root causes. So I think that's, in terms of innovation, I think that's crucial. And then I think, as I mentioned earlier before, that I think, really focusing on your own or looking for external solutions to help drive, decarbonization of your own products and operations, and corporates reducing emissions along their own value chains, as well as investing and inventing solutions. That's the way to close the innovation gap.
Well, thank you, Mark. I mean, you point out exactly the whole purpose of today, because you see, I believe that we need to solve our own problems, right? Nobody's going to come in and solve them. And actually delaying them by buying credit is not a solution. It just delays the problem. So we need to attack every process in order to decarbonize it. Not only decarbonize it, it's also, eliminating waste, increasing recycled content. I mean, there's so many different facets to this. But ultimately, we can only do this with a completely different approach to innovation. We need to be completely open to academics. We generally are open to academics. I think we're good at that. But what we're terrible at is actually collaborating with startups that are creating new technologies, or maybe buying startups, helping them along. This is not about ownership. This is about commercializing technologies, which will go a longer way. So I would love to, for example, see industry collaboration. I don't mind collaborating with our competitors if we're going to be able to commercialize the technology, which will help decarbonize much faster because we bring scale and money. And there are bureaucratical issues that make this kind of collaboration a little tougher, a competition authority, etc. But I think that the climate is a much more pressing issue, and that there are ways around that, legal ways around that, of course. But I think collaboration, as you mentioned, is going to be very, very key. Niklas, I'm taking too much time as I'm talking too much myself as a moderator, but I'm trying to bring the contribution because your experience is so impressive to me. I mean, with you, for example, Save the Winters or Save My Winters, what you're part of, is something that's very dear to me as well. I didn't even know it existed, but essentially I'm a big lover of mountains and the environment that creates, and climbing and so on. Now, I guess being part of that is what pushed you into what you're doing as well now. But I'm most curious about the type of companies. So we're here declaring to you that we're offending companies, and we're at a time now where we have decided to hedge the future, as Mark said, to hedge the risks to our financial future. We are going to start investing in nature-based solutions. And the difficulty there, of course, is trusting, as Salla said, in the right execution capability, because these are long-term investments, whether they're mangroves or regenerative forest. It doesn't really matter. What is the cutting edge there now? What would you say if you were to tell us, go and do this now? What would it be?
There are so many ways to capture carbon from the atmosphere, and you mentioned nature-based solutions, obviously that's the thing we can scale right now. So we need to invest into them in the next foreseeable future. But in the long term, we also need to support other innovative solutions. Some of them can actually be nature-based. So they can be underwater sequestration, so-called blue carbon, which is really, really interesting. We have one project in our portfolio where kelp, which is grown in vast amounts. It's a very, very fast-growing biomass. It's grown at open sea, and then it's dropped to the bottom of the deep ocean, where it stores the carbon for potentially thousands of years. And these things can be scaled pretty quickly. Then we have the engineered solutions to capturing carbon, which also need investment, but they're probably not a solution for the next, maybe a decade or so. But at the same time, we need to support them. Our solution has been to invest 20% of all offset payments into these innovative solutions to capture carbon that go beyond these traditional means that we already have right now. That way we help the market evolve as well. We get to know these technologies better. Some of them are very, very expensive, but when we blend them together with more inexpensive methods of sequestering carbon, we can then provide our customers an opportunity to support technologies that otherwise would cost close to, let's say, €1,000 of a ton. So that's been our approach. Personally, I'm a big fan of the nature-based stuff, but it will have limitations because it competes against other uses of land, for example, food production. It has a lot of complexity when it comes to land rights issues, social justice. It has a certain clang of carbon colonialism to it as well when we support these projects in the global south. And then if we don't do everything to minimize our emissions first before we offset, then that's the wrong path. But I think we're getting to a situation where, I mean, we just released a white paper this week where we try to put offsetting in its right place, in the like tiniest last corner available in corporate climate action. You have to do everything in your power to reduce emissions first and align your emission reduction trajectory with science-based targets, with the Paris Agreement targets that we have. After that, there's no reason why you shouldn't take responsibility for those emissions that you're causing still today, tomorrow, the day after tomorrow. And carbon credits is a great way of doing that, but you just need to be super careful in choosing the right projects. And there's a lot of greenwashing in this market, so you need to be vigilant as a buyer.
I fully agree with you. I mean, we are going to do this, by the way. So we are going to invest in nature-based solutions. We have to. I believe we have to, from a fiduciary duty point of view, because today it might be 70, 80, 90 euros, but in 10 years' time, we don't know when it's mandatory in a warming world where millions of people are homeless or waterless, etc. Regulation will be much stricter, and to actually accumulate some of those credits and get in early, I think is important. But choosing the right projects is very difficult. I guess that's where you come in. We're out of time, but I'm going to keep going unless somebody stops me for at least another 10 minutes. I hope that's okay. But I'll keep the questions much shorter. Salla, I travel all the time and I hate it. I offset my travels. Are you really going to give us synthetic biofuels for the aviation industry?
We already have a sustainable aviation fuel that you can buy. We even developed a way of selling it directly to corporate customers, because it's been a difficult time, obviously, for airlines to invest in it. It's not exactly always a cheap solution. So it's also something that, corporations who need to travel, but they want to do it in a way that is more sustainable, then this is an option that they have. So yes, this is something that definitely is a solution that needs scaling up.
Well, that's great. And that's a great example, because sustainable fuel will probably also give you carbon credits. I'm not exactly sure the technology you're using behind it that can offset your other business yourself. I'm much more of a fan of creating offset credits yourself as a company than buying them. That's why we're investing in the solar panels, for example. But that's an easy decision for us because payback is under 4 years. Most of our factories are in very hot countries. So it makes financial sense as well. Mark, as there's a huge boom in investments in this area, and we're seeing now the decline of the high growth tech stocks. Today, I think Amazon and Apple took a huge hit, and they're not even huge growth stocks anymore. They've been around for a long time. But my point there is we've gone through a huge digital transformation, which has created a wave of businesses, which has created massive wealth for investors, employment, and it's also, of course, the efficiencies it's brought. It's added GDP to many regions of the world. How do you see this sustainability transformation and technology companies that are focusing on this with innovation? Do you think we will see in 10 years or 5 years what we're seeing today with the digital transformers or the social media companies? Will we see this with the sustainability transformation technologies?
Yes, I think so. I mean, if you look at the number of climate unicorns, I mean, I actually think, it's growing super rapidly. I think we can expect the number could reach 100 by the end of the year. I might be being a little bit optimistic, but I think that's a possibility, because it shows where the focus is going, right? So it shows the opportunity for climate impact and in turn economic impact, which I think is crucial, right? So I think that's something that we have to bear in mind. There's also an awful lot of money that's going into renewable energy and energy storage, EVs and so on. Last year, I think it was $900 billion. Then there was also, I think, another 165 billion in climate innovation funding. And then when you look at the venture capital world, $54 billion for 600 deals, right? That's all the great news. The sort of the sad news is there's going to be a lot of losers. But I think the losers will be the companies that can't commercialize. And I think you mentioned that just a little while ago, Hakan. So I think it's not enough just to go through the motions and try and create something cool. If you can't make money at it, then it's not going to take off. And so climate ventures may start in the lab, but unicorn status is based on the belief and then ultimately the proof that they can scale commercially, and collaborate and disrupt corporate ecosystems.
Spot on. Again, another responsibility of corporate leadership teams is to help commercialize these technologies, and we don't have to do it just as a helping hand. I mean, we do it with a profit motive as well, because ultimately we are the testing grounds of those technologies. If there's going to be someone who can come up with a filter mechanism on a enameling plant, which is very energy intensive, and create carbon, which is then physical carbon and can be taken out, and we need to be able to buy that expensively, test it, give them the grounds to actually commercialize their technologies. Thank you for that. Niklas, you mentioned earlier that greenwashing is a big problem in this field, and this is where I really struggle, because if we are going to commit, let's say 10, 20 million euros today into planting and then protecting a mangrove forest in Raja Ampat, which is in the middle of nowhere. I've been there. I love it. It's beautiful, but it's got nothing to do with my business. I'm not in the business of planting mangrove forests. I mean, as much as I love what they do and is needed, and we have nothing to do with Indonesia either, maybe a small business there. So this is what makes me nervous, because then I have to trust somebody who's going to plant it. I have to trust somebody who's going to make sure it stays planted, by the way, which is often a problem. And there's so much fraud in this area, it really makes me nervous. How can we really verify and trust the right projects?
Well, we've created our own way of evaluating projects together with climate scientists, and when we use that, we see that 90% of projects with leading market standards fail. So that says a lot of how high we set the bar, but also it maybe says something about the standard on the market in general. I would not put all my eggs in one basket either. When we talk about nature-based solutions, we have risks always with the permanence of the mangroves or the other trees or whatever. So I would definitely also make sure that I spread risks by choosing a few projects and not putting everything into one. You are taking a small leap of faith, but with the right due diligence, with the right partners, I think you can make good choices. I mean, when I said there's a lot of greenwashing, not all of it's sort of outright greenwashing. It's just that we lack the necessary structures and lack the necessary maybe regulation as well to police this market, and the existing standards leave too much room for maybe even unintentional greenwashing at times. The issue is not that the mangroves wouldn't be there or the protected forest wouldn't be there. It's just that they account for the carbon in the wrong way, and they tend to over-exaggerate the climate impact of these projects.
True.
So also I would recommend a very conservative approach to kind of calculating the carbon, making sure that you rather underestimate the impact of the project than overestimate, especially if you're making an equivalency with your emissions and targeting at a, let's say, carbon neutrality or net zero target. You need to make sure that there's a margin of, or sort of a buffer there, a margin of error, which will definitely be needed when talking about nature-based solutions.
No, I mean, thank you, Niklas. We're already carbon neutral, by the way. We have been for 3 years, but as you know very well, I find that meaningless. And just for the audience, patting ourselves on the back, saying we're carbon neutral today, 10 years later, we'll look back and say, how on earth were we even saying that? How was it a target? Because Scope 1 and 2 emissions are only 2% of our emissions. Who cares if we're carbon neutral in 2% of our emissions? The only thing that matters is Scope 3 emissions. And you won't find many CEOs talking about that. And this is why we need, open innovation to work, because we all have the same problem. It's a problem that no one talks about. But if we actually put it on the table and talk about it, and we can find the right projects to invest in to offset in the future, I think we're both hedging and we're taking on the problem to fix our own future and the future of our children. I'm way over time. I apologize, but sometimes, being the CEO, you can demand the time. So I'm sorry from the team. Last question. I'd like a very direct recommendation from you each on what do you think Arçelik should do and focus on to make it, very short, very quick, and the topic can be anything. I've been pointing the finger at you a little bit. You can point it right back. Salla?
Look at what else you can do beyond climate. You mentioned that sustainability is much more. We just introduced our sustainability vision that goes beyond climate and also does tackle scope 3, also kind of scope 3 in the other topics, biodiversity, human rights, how you deal with people and the planet around you. And I think that would put you on a path of being truly sustainable.
Thank you. Mark?
I would say look deep. You've got assets and IP that have the potential to become climate unicorns. Okay, they need to be validated. They need to be accelerated. They may be caught in your R&D pipeline. Maybe you've tried some. Maybe some have failed. Maybe it wasn't the right team. Maybe the timing wasn't right. But maybe it is now. So maybe take some fresh eyes and have a look at what you have. Because I think, you've got assets that when paired with perhaps maybe some existing climate ventures could create unicorns for you. And I think you should just look at what you can bring in and what you can, like you've done with the washing machine example, what you can also share, right? So then you figure out your strategy of what do you do yourself, what do you build, what do you buy. And the other thing, last thing, I would say that I think there are some who believe that ESG comes at the expense of investment returns, but research shows that that's not true. So in some cases, ESG can actually enhance profits. So I know some people think, oh well, it's one or the other. Either this is going to help climate change, or it's going to help ESG, or I get profits. You're not going to get both. But I don't think that's true at all. And I think, like we talked about earlier, that only the profitable path will lead us to net zero. So let's look at everything you've got, all your IP, and what can you do with it, within the company, without the company, and create some climate unicorns.
Thank you, Mark. I mean, I love the idea of creating a few unicorns from what we have brewing within us. That would be proof of concept, and everybody would be happy. Of course, shareholders first.
Of course.
Niklas?
I think get heavily involved in the carbon removal market. It's an emerging market. If we think about the level of, or the amounts of carbon we need to remove from the atmosphere, we're talking about tens of gigatons, or even hundreds of gigatons before the end of the century. It will become a bigger market than the oil and gas market is today. Be early in that market and influence in the direction where it grows, because right now we're at a pathways. It can grow in the wrong direction when it won't have any climate impact because there's so much greenwashing going on. But if you're committed and involved, you can also influence the direction in which this market will grow. And lastly, I'd say, why stop at carbon neutrality or even net zero? When we have already too much CO2 in the atmosphere, we have a historic responsibility to also remove it from there. So go beyond it and think about negativity, carbon negativity already today, not just something that's in the way in the future, but something that we can actually do already today, just as a thought.
Yeah, well, thank you. That's it's so true. I mean, it took us a while to get our head around, net zero, and now thinking of carbon negativity is actually the way forward, because I believe targets and goals are important. They need to be reachable, but you need to be able to dream, like Salla said. If you can bring dreams to the table, that's how actually, and you give the platform. You become a platform for open innovation where everybody can contribute. Experts, students, creators, mentors, startups. It doesn't really matter. Everybody can bring something to the table. Is how we're going to tackle this existential problem. Well, thank you very much. We're living in very difficult times, right? We're seeing extreme temperatures, in the extremities of the world, in the parts of the world which are frozen, like we all love you guys up in Northern Europe, me on the mountains, but we're seeing temperatures never seen before. And what we don't know is if actually we're going to go in beyond tipping points where things start accelerating in a natural cycle itself. So even today is too late for action that we were going to take tomorrow. Thank you for being with me on the panel. I hope everybody learned something and was interested, but I want to close with saying that for Arçelik, this path is a winning strategy in our business. If we manage to differentiate and lead this transformation for the industry, taking the industry along, everybody will win. But believe me, this will have the biggest single impact on our P&L statement in the future. Thank you for listening. And again, thank you for joining me, dear panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you.